begin with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Bhante.
Okay, so today we continue now with the next sutta in our list. We're on our schedule. This is sutta number 21. It's called the simile of the sword, the Kakachupama Sutta. And the ending of the sutta is very well known and very often quoted when people are explaining the Buddhist practice of patience. And so as we'll see, that the main theme of this sutta is how to practice patience under difficult and trying conditions. Especially patience when people speak to you in ways which are aggressive, hostile, offensive, disrespectful, abusive, slanderous. Something that we all encounter many times these days, and so it's a lesson that we have to learn. Okay, so the sutta begins with the particular situation that had developed in the Sangha. It says, on this occasion, a monk named the Venerable Mollapambuna had been associating overmuch with bhikkhunis, that is, with Buddhist nuns. Okay, now it's a general principle that the Buddha allowed for the ordination of women as bhikkhunis, and so he had two divisions in the Sangha, the Bhikkhu Sangha, the community of monks, and the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the community of nuns. And in order to maintain the sense of proper decorum within the Sangha, it's a kind of guiding principle that the monks and nuns shouldn't associate too closely, because probably there's a fear that, quite natural fear, that if they associate too closely, then what happens is, especially you have young men who are being ordained as monks, maybe they become ordained as novices when they're 16, 17 years old. They get their full ordination. They could be 20, 21 years old, they get their full ordination. And so now they're in their 20s, and then you have women getting ordained again as novices. They could be 16, 17 years old, then getting the full ordination when they're 20, 21. And so they're young people in their 20s, early 30s. If they associate too closely, especially one associating closely with the other, then it's just natural that feelings of, let's say, personal affection develop between them. And when feelings of personal affection become strong, then it leads into romantic love. And when feelings of romantic love develop, then the Buddha's discourses on meditation, boring. Buddhist discourses on insight, wisdom, boring. Buddhist discourses on supreme liberation, boring. But the mind is thinking of only one thing. When the monk hears the name of others talking about such and such bhikkhuni, then he's interested. When the other bhikkhunis are talking about such and such a monk, then she's interested. So that's human nature. And so in order to keep the monks and nuns sort of continuing along the track of the celibate life, it's a kind of guiding principle that they should keep a certain distance from one another. But there's a certain amount of interaction which takes place, because in the Buddha's time, there were not printed texts of the Buddha's discourses. And so since the monks were living in close proximity to the Buddha, they would hear most of the Buddha's discourses, and they would then take on part of the responsibility of going to the quarters where the nuns are living and giving teachings to the nuns. And also, since the order of monks had been established before the order of nuns, then within the structure of the teaching, the order of monks functions somewhat like an elder brother to the order of nuns. And so they give instructions, guidance, advice to the nuns. But in order to ensure that that's done smoothly, usually when a monk is assigned to give teachings to the nuns, then he would be accompanied by another monk. So there would be at least 2 monks going together to the nuns' monastery. Okay, so this monk, Mollapakuna, apparently was not observing this kind of principle of decorum, but he was probably associating too closely with the bhikkhunis, with the nuns, on a very personal basis. And so the text goes on and says he was associating so closely with the bhikkhunis that if any bhikkhu spoke dispraise of those bhikkhunis when he was around, then he would become angry and upset. And then he would start blowing it up into a full-blown case. And if any other bhikkhu should speak dispraise of Venerable Mollapakuna in the presence of those bhikkhunis, then they would become angry and displeased and would make a big case out of it. Okay, so when the bhikkhus are aware of what is going on, they come to the Buddha, and one of them reports to the Buddha what has been happening, and then the Buddha asks a monk to go to Mollapakuna and call him. Tell him that the Buddha wants to speak to you. Okay, and so one monk goes to Mollapakuna, tells him, and Mollapakuna comes to the Buddha's presence. Now, paragraph 5, notice this is interesting. It shows you, first it shows you the procedure that the Buddha uses, and then this procedure serves as a kind of guideline for conducting affairs in the monastic order all the way down to the present. And it should be observed not only in affairs of the monastic order, but in any kind of situation where one person or one group of people are lodging a complaint to you about another person, about the misconduct of another person. So when Pakuna comes to the Buddha's presence, the Buddha doesn't begin at once saying, you should not behave like that, you should not do that. But the Buddha asks him first, is it true that you are associating very closely with the bhikkhunis? So much so that when any bhikkhu speaks dispraise of the bhikkhunis in your presence, you get angry. If somebody speaks dispraise of you in their presence, they get angry. Is that the case? So the Buddha first has to get the person who is accused to admit to the charge against him. He doesn't just accept the charge on its face value as being true, but he wants the person to admit to the fault himself. Okay, so Pakuna says, yes, this is true. And then the Buddha gives him a sort of word of advice, paragraph 6. He says, "It is not proper for you, a clansman gone forth out of faith from the home life into homelessness, to associate overmuch or too closely with the bhikkhunis. If anyone speaks, such that if anyone speaks dispraise of those bhikkhunis in your presence," okay, this is, "therefore if anyone speaks dispraise of those bhikkhunis in your presence, you should abandon any desires and any thoughts based on the household life. And herein you should train yourself thus. My mind will be unaffected, and I shall utter no evil words." Maybe that's a little too strong. "I shall utter no wrong speech," might be better. Or no harsh words. "I shall utter no harsh words. But I shall abide compassionate for his welfare with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. That is how you should train." Okay, now I think one has to know how to observe this principle correctly and not take it to an unwarranted extreme. Okay, suppose you have some friends, and then somebody comes to your presence and then starts speaking criticism of your friends. It doesn't mean that you should just sort of shake your head like this, say, "Whatever they say about my friends, that's okay, it's not going to affect me." If you think that they're wrong, you should certainly defend your friends from criticism. And if you think it's an issue that requires further investigation, then you should maybe ask them further questions, ask them whether they have any grounds for their charge. You might go to your friends and ask them whether the criticism that these other people are making is true. So it doesn't mean that one remains completely indifferent and just accepts the criticisms that others make about your friends at face value. The point is that one should not let what the Buddha here calls desires and thoughts, translated thoughts as intentions, desires and intentions based on the household life. Or we could put this more simply as worldly desires and motivations. Don't let them interfere with your judgment. So that because you have a preference for a certain person, you like a certain person, you immediately feel compelled to, you first get angry, and then you feel immediately compelled to jump to their defense. But rather the first task, when you hear the criticism of those who are your friends, those that you have affection for, the first task is to keep the mind calm, in a state of equanimity. Don't let the mind get stirred to anger and then to a quick, unreflective response. But first you arouse loving kindness or even compassion for the person who is uttering these harsh words. Make the mind free from inner hate, and then you can discuss with this person further. If you feel like you should defend your friend, you can do so. If you want to ask further questions, you can do so. If you want to call your friend for inquiry and investigation, then you can take that approach. But don't immediately respond with anger and harshness towards the person. Okay, the way it continues, I have to confess first, I don't know whether I would be able to sustain this myself. If anyone gives those bhikkhunis a blow with his hand, a blow with a clod of maybe a stone or a clod of earth, clay, or with a stick or with a knife in your presence, you should abandon any desires and any thoughts based on the household life and train yourself thus. My mind will be unaffected. Well, I have to say, if anybody was hitting whether fellow monks, fellow nuns, or innocent householders in my presence, with the hands, with a clod, with a stick, with a knife, I would rush to their defense. But I would try to do so with a calm mind, having compassion for the person who's attacking them. I don't think I would be able to just stand there and say, I will keep a mind of loving kindness towards him and let him do whatever he wants. Okay, so you train yourself thus, my mind will be unaffected. Okay, if anyone speaks dispraise in your presence, again you abandon any desires and thoughts based on the household life. Oh, I see, okay. It should be if anyone speaks dispraise to you, criticizing you, then you should abandon any desires and motivations based on the household life. Then if anyone should give you a blow with a hand, with a clod, with a stick, with a knife, then you should abandon any desires and any thoughts based on the household life. And again, you train yourself, my mind will be unaffected, and I shall utter no evil words, I shall abide compassionate for his welfare, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. Yeah, if people speak dispraise of me, I think I could take it. If they hit me with a clod, a stick, or a knife, I could take it. But if they hit others, whether I like the others or not, but if I see that they're innocent people, I would certainly rush to their defense. Okay, now the Buddha apparently changes the topic. It seems a little bit abrupt, the different track in which he leads the discourse. But the purpose is to show how in the past the monks were easy to train compared to the way they are now at the time the Buddha is speaking. Like this becomes a perennial subject within the Buddha's own time and throughout Buddha's history, that things were always better in the past, and as time goes on, the behavior of the monks, or even of the whole Buddhist community, gradually deteriorates until we reach the rife corruption, deterioration of the present age. Okay, so the Buddha says, there was an occasion in the past when the bhikkhus satisfied my mind. Then, at that time, I addressed the bhikkhus and I said to them, I eat at a single session, just in one sitting, and by so doing, I am free from illness and affliction, and I enjoy lightness, strength, and physical comfort. In other words, he's healthy, light in the body, and strong. So then the Buddha instructs the monks, he said, you too eat your food for the day just in one session, one meal a day in one sitting. And by so doing, you too will enjoy good health and strength. And then I had no need to keep on instructing those monks. I didn't have to repeat the advice again and again. I only had to remind them of my instructions, to call this to their attention, and immediately they would follow my advice. And so then this is like a chariot, which is harnessed to thoroughbred horses. It's waiting at the crossroads. And then a skilled trainer of horses comes along. He mounts the chariot, takes the reins in his left hand, the goad in his right hand, and then he could drive out wherever he wants, by any road that he wants. The horses immediately follow his the cues that he gives them with the reins and with the goad. So in the same way, the Buddha says, I didn't have to keep on advising these monks again and again. I only had to give them this one suggestion and they would immediately follow it. And so now the Buddha sort of broadens the scope of his instruction and he says, abandon what is unwholesome and devote yourselves to what is wholesome, to wholesome qualities. For that is how you will come to growth, to increase or development and fulfillment in this doctrine and discipline. Then he uses another simile. It's like a big sala tree growth. The sala tree is a kind of tree that grows in northern India. I don't know what the Indian version is like, but there's also a sala tree that grows in Sri Lanka, but I think it's a different species. Very big tree, growing very, very tall. Okay, a big sala tree grows near a village or town, and it's choked with castor oil weeds. And then some man comes on the scene who wants to help the sala trees to grow. And so he cuts down and he throws out the crooked saplings that rob the sap of the healthy shoots of the sala tree. And he would clean up the inside of the grove and he would tend the straight, well-formed saplings so that the sala tree grove later comes to growth, increase, and fulfillment. And so in the same way, one should abandon what is unwholesome. What is unwholesome is like the crooked, stunted sala tree saplings, and like the castor oil weeds. And then the wholesome states, those are like the straight, well-formed saplings. And so one cultivates the wholesome states within oneself, and then one comes to growth, increase, and fulfillment in this dharma and discipline. Okay, now the Buddha is going to bring the discourse back to the main theme with which he started, and that is controlling inner anger. And he does this by showing, we could say this by revealing how anger can have deep roots within the mind, which are not immediately apparent, but they only come to the surface when we are put in provocative situations. And so for this reason, just because one can maintain a somewhat serene, calm, and peaceful mind when you're in favorable conditions, doesn't mean that you've overcome anger. Sometimes one has to test oneself, but maybe not too quickly, not too hastily, by putting oneself into stressful and provocative situations, just to see how, to what extent the mind is developed in overcoming anger. And so the Buddha uses here a simile, or maybe we call this a parable, or a little story, to show how anger can arise under provocative situations, so that the anger that we don't think is there will come to the surface and reveal itself when we're subjected to certain stresses that we don't ordinarily encounter. So he's giving a story about a housewife. This would be like a house mistress, the master of a house, in the same city of Savatthi. And she had a good reputation. Everybody thought she's gentle, meek, and peaceful. Her name was Mistress Videhika. And then this Mistress Videhika had a maid whose name was Kali, who was said to be clever, nimble, neat in her work. And then the maid Kali thought, my mistress, everybody thinks that my mistress is peaceful, gentle, calm, but is she really free from anger or not? Let me test her to see to what extent she's free from anger and to what extent she'll become angry. And so one day, the maid, Kali, got up late. And so the mistress calls her. It seems this is not a very polite way to address her. She says, "Hey, Kali." And then Kali replies, "What is it, madam?" And then the mistress says, "What's going on with you that you've gotten up late?" You know, it could be that she's ill, feeling exhausted. And maybe in India at that time, with the very heavily stratified class society, even if one is ill, one is expected to get up early and start working. I heard somebody talking. Okay. Okay. Okay, so this mistress Videhika asked Kali, "What is the matter that you got up so late?" And then Kali replies, "Nothing is the matter," which is kind of confrontational way of replying. So then the mistress says, "Nothing is the matter, you wicked girl, yet you get up so late." Then she became angry and displeased, and she scowled. Okay, so Kali is starting to realize that my mistress does have anger, even though she doesn't reveal it so easily. So now, the next day, she's going to test her mistress a little further. And so she gets up, the next day, she gets up still later in the day. Again, the exchange goes on. "Why are you getting up so late?" And the maid says, "No reason, nothing is the matter." And now, this time, the mistress, Kali, became so angry that she started to speak angry words and to scold her servant. Again, Kali is realizing that my mistress has even more anger. The third day, Kali got up still later, and then the mistress Videhika scolded her, and then when Kali replied, "Nothing is the matter," then the mistress Videhika took a rolling pin or some other big object and gave her a blow on the head and caused her head to become wounded and start to bleed. And so then the maid Kali, with the blood running from her cut head, ran through the neighborhood saying to the neighbors, "See, O ladies, this gentle lady's work. See the meek lady's work. See your peaceful lady's work. How could she get so angry that she gives me a blow in the head and causes me to be shedding blood?" And so when this happened, then everybody came to know the real nature of Mistress Videhika. Mistress Videhika is rough, she's violent, she's merciless. Okay, and so now the Buddha applies this example to the case of the monks. And this is a situation, I have to say, that I've seen many times in my life as a monk. Here at the beginning, some bhikkhu is extremely gentle, very meek, very peaceful, so long as disagreeable courses of speech, disagreeable words don't touch him. But it is when disagreeable words touch him that it can be understood whether that monk is really kind, gentle, and peaceful. I do not call a monk easy to admonish who is easy to admonish and makes himself easy to admonish only for the sake of getting robes, food, a resting place, and medicinal requisites. Why is that? Because that monk is not easy to admonish and so on when he gets no robes, alms food, resting place, and medicinal requisites. Okay, but it's when a bhikkhu is easy to admonish and so on because he honors, respects, and reveres the Dhamma that I call him easy to admonish. And therefore you should train yourselves thus. We shall be easy to admonish and make ourselves easy to admonish because we honor, respect, and revere the Dhamma. That is how you should train, O monks. Yeah, what I've witnessed many times is that when I was especially when I was in Sri Lanka, there come young Westerners who become ordained as monks. And when they're just very newly ordained, they seem very humble, very meek, very gentle, very polite, very respectful. But, you know, after 6 months, 1 year being a monk, then they think that they're very learned, very experienced, that they're now veteran monks, and then they become sometimes quite arrogant, very rude, sometimes aggressive, and then you can tell that their politeness, their gentleness, their meekness, I wouldn't say that it's done disingenuously with the aim of getting some kind of personal benefits for themselves. Often it's simply because they're in a completely new environment, in a new situation, and so they're trying to fit in, to find their little niche. And so being gentle, humble, polite, and respectful at the beginning is a way to earn the affection of others. But once they find their place, say within a monastery, then they can become sometimes even aggressive and rude to monks who have been ordained for 10, 15, 20 years. I remember one young German monk who was like that back in the early 1990s. Yeah, he would find faults with things that one monk would say, then he would go to another monastery and start reporting those faults to other monks there, trying to create conflicts between monks in different monasteries. Usually what happens almost invariably to them is after 2 or 3 years, they vanish. Okay, now the Buddha comes to what is the main theme of this discourse, which he's going to repeat over and over, each time illustrating it with a different simile. And it's one of the things that always strikes me very much about the Buddha's suttas or discourses, is the way almost every important point is illustrated by a simile which helps to, a simile or a parable, which helps to lodge that doctrinal point deeply within the mind. It's amazing how the Buddha can draw these similes from so many different aspects of human life. They say that he lived locked up in the palace for the first 29 years of his life, but how does he know the way elephant trainers train elephants, the way horse trainers train the horses, the way goldsmiths prepare some gold ore to make gold ornaments. And here we have a variety of similes. Okay, so first comes the main point of advice. There are these 5 courses of speech, 5 ways of speech that others may use when they address you. Okay, their speech may be timely or untimely, that is spoken at the proper time or at an improper time. For example, improper time, somebody wants to criticize your behavior, to point out you've been doing something wrong, even though he might have a valid criticism. So maybe you're sitting around with your friends, chatting at a table in the dining hall. Then he comes over, he sits down in the midst of your group, and then he said that, you know, when you were in the shrine room and everybody else was bowing, you were just standing there yawning. Why were you doing that? And then it's not the proper time. If you want to criticize the person, you wait till you can find that person alone and speak to them privately, where you don't embarrass them in front of the group. Okay, so their speech might be timely or untimely. It might be true or untrue. They might be criticizing you for something which is true, which you've rarely done, or for something which is false, something that they've just heard about by hearsay. And so what you do, if somebody tells you that so-and-so has been doing something wrong, and you want to speak to that other person about their wrong deed, then you don't call that person to your presence and then start to reproach them for what you've heard from the third person. But you follow the way that the Buddha used when he called Moliyapaguna to him. You call the person and you ask that person whether you have done such and such. It could be that the person is not willing to admit that he's done something wrong. Maybe somebody comes to you and says that he saw his friend Sam, maybe in a bookshop, take a book from the shelf, stick it within his jacket, and then walk out without paying for it. And so you call Sam to your presence. You say, is it true, Sam, that you've done this? And Sam says, no, I didn't do that. But Sam is really lying about this. And maybe you can suspect from his facial gestures, the way he replies, maybe a little nervously, you suspect that he's lying. And so it doesn't mean that because he denies it that you have to accept his word at face value. You might probe on a little more deeply to get him to admit it. And if he won't admit it, then you might even call the other person to your presence and speak to both of them together and try to get the other person to make that accusation and try to find some way to resolve the conflict. And sometimes even something that one has either seen oneself or inferred can be misleading or mistaken. I recall something that happened to me in Sri Lanka some years ago. This would be, I think, 1995. I used to have, well, I don't have it anymore since I'm not living there, but in the place where I was living in Sri Lanka, I had a shortwave radio, which I would listen to in the evening to get the BBC World Service News. Okay, and there was this young boy from the village. From time to time, he used to come to the monastery just to see the monks. A little boy from a poor family. And so this was the day before the Buddha's birthday, before Vesak. He came to pay respects to us. Okay, then the next day, I had been invited out to go to some friend's house for lunch, and I looked for my glasses, and I couldn't find them. I looked all over the building, every place where I put the glasses. I couldn't find them. And when was the last time that I used the glasses? It would have been the previous evening that I went out for a walk, which would have been about 5:30, come back about 6. And that boy came about 6 o'clock. Couldn't find the glasses. He's a poor boy. So the inference was, even though it was such a terrible thought, that boy has stolen the glasses. And so later the next day, I sent somebody to the village to call that boy. And since he just spoke a little bit of English, and I just spoke a little bit of Sinhala, so I had to call the Sinhalese monk who was living at the monastery to translate. And so I called that boy, 3 of us were together, and I said to that boy, you know, that was a very terrible thing that you did last night. You know, you came to the monastery, and when I wasn't looking, you took my eyeglasses. Why did you do that? Then the boy said, no, I didn't take the glasses. And then I said, well, there was nobody else in the building but me and you, and I looked everywhere for the glasses. I couldn't find them. You must have taken them. Please return them. And the boy broke down crying. And when he started to cry, I realized he was telling the truth, and then I almost started to cry. And I patted him on the back and said, don't worry, don't worry. No, okay, I believe you, I believe you. Okay, then sent him home. Then every day after I finished listening to the BBC evening news, I disconnect the radio and I put it in a particular spot. So that evening, I went to the spot where I keep the radio to get it to hook up to listen to the BBC News. And I pull the radio with the wire, and what is entangled in the wire? The glasses. So there I was so sure, as a matter of inference, you know, I was pondering this for hours. I didn't want to accuse the boy, but the only conclusion I could come to was that he had taken them. But all the time they were in the radio. Or in the wire of the radio. Okay, so true or untrue, gently or harshly. Sometimes people speak to you, even though they might be accusing you of something, but they'll speak gently. Sometimes other people will speak harshly, angrily, roughly to you. Sometimes they'll speak connected with good, in other words, with the intention of benefiting you, or with the intention of harm, intending to harm you. And sometimes they'll speak with a mind of loving kindness, sometimes with inner hate. Okay, so Buddha then says, actually he's pretty much repeating what he said, but when others address you, their speech may be timely or untimely and so on. Their speech may be spoken with a mind of loving kindness or with inner hate. But here is the point, you should train yourself thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, unshaken, and we will utter no harsh words as a rejoinder. We shall abide compassionate towards them, with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. Okay, so that is the way one sets up one's mind. And now the Buddha explains how one uses this situation as an opportunity for developing loving kindness towards that person, and then spreading out from that person, one extends the loving kindness throughout the whole world. Okay, so we shall dwell pervading that person with a mind imbued with loving kindness, and starting with that person, we shall pervade the entire world with a mind of loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. So that is how one should train. So first, one takes the person who is speaking to you roughly, harshly, falsely, with the intention of harming you, with inner hate, whatever. And one directs loving kindness towards that person. May that person be well, may that person be happy. One could think about the bad consequences that person is creating for himself because of accusing me wrongly with bad intentions, because of his anger, because of his harmful intentions. This person is creating the seeds of unwholesome karma that will bring suffering for them in the future. Or I know this person speaks to others like this, and so this person is creating many enemies. Few people like this person. He's regarded with suspicion, hostility by others. Nobody wants to become friends with him. And this person is just creating a lot of trouble for himself. So in this way one creates or develops loving kindness and compassion towards that person, wishing for them to be well, to be happy, to be free from suffering. Then one extends that loving kindness. Once one can develop or direct the loving kindness towards this person, then one spreads out the loving kindness till it embraces everybody in the world. All those, one might start with all those who are the victims of calumny, just like yourself. All those being attacked verbally, all those being slandered, all those being dominated and attacked verbally by others. And so one develops loving kindness, compassion towards them. Then one can develop loving kindness and compassion to all of the victims of harsh speech. And then from there one could just extend loving kindness and compassion towards everybody in the world. Okay, now to illustrate how the quality of mind that one has to develop, this mind which cannot be shaken, cannot be moved, cannot be budged from the attitude of loving kindness and compassion, the Buddha gives the simile of a man who comes along with a hoe and a basket, and he says, or he thinks to himself, I am going to make this great earth to be without earth. That is, using the shovel, he's going to, by shoveling up the ground, he's going to remove all of the soil from the earth. And so he would start digging in one place or another, strewing the soil here and there, spitting here and there, urinating here and there, thinking, may the earth be without earth, or may the earth be without any soil, may the earth be without any soil. And so the Buddha says, he asks the monks, what do you think? Could this man remove all of the soil from the great earth? And then the monks say, no, Bhante. Why is that? Because the earth is deep and immeasurable. It's not easy. In other words, it's impossible to make the great earth be without earth. Eventually, this man would only become tired, weary, disappointed from all of his useless efforts. So the Buddha, he doesn't apply the simile point by point, but he says, he just repeats the same thing and says, in the same way, you should develop this mind which remains unaffected, and then you extend loving kindness to everyone in the world. But the point is, That just as this man, by digging the soil, can't remove the soil from the earth, so when you are devoted to the practice of loving kindness, when somebody comes, speaks to you with harsh, angry words, with false accusations, intending to harm you, speaking with anger and hate within, he can't remove that loving kindness and compassion from the mind. Can't cause the mind to turn around and become angry, vengeful, vindictive, and bitter. But will always maintain that mind of loving kindness, compassion, and equanimity towards this person. Okay, the next simile, paragraph 14. Here a man comes with a palette of paints of different color, crimson, turmeric, it's a kind of mustard color, indigo or carmine. Indigo is kind of blue, dark blue. Carmine, and he says,